Hello from Flagstaff, Arizona. My name is John McDermott, and I work for the Institute for Human Development. We are a university center for excellence in developmental disabilities on Northern Arizona University's campus. I want to go over a few housekeeping items. This is a listen-only webinar. If you have any questions or comments, please utilize the chat pod right in the middle or the Q&A pod to the lower left of the screen. Towards the top of some of the pods, you'll see an icon with 4 arrows. This will allow for a full screen mode on your device or computer for that particular pod. In order to provide a venue for questions for all participants, if you cannot access the chat pod or the Q&A pod, you can send questions to ihd@nau.edu. I will put that inside the chat box. So if you have questions and you can't access those 2 pods, please send them there. And finally, we'll be recording the webinar today to archive on IHD's channel and ADDPC's website. So I'd like to hand this over to Sarah Roof from the council. Thank you very much.
So we're excited that you're all with us, and we have a packed session. So I'm going to quickly introduce our speakers. I know you'll really take away a lot of great content from today's presentation. So first, we're going to hear from the Executive Director of the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council, and that's Erica McFadden. Next up, we'll hear from Garrick McFadden, a local attorney, who will be sharing some great examples about engaging people with disabilities. Following Garrick, we're going to hear from Chatham Kitz. He's a community relations coordinator at the Maricopa County Recorder's Office. And then we will also hear from Richard Cruz, who is a partner and a community organizer with the Radical Solutions Group here in Phoenix. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm going to be handing things off to Erica. As the session moves forward, if you do have questions, feel free to type them in the chat box, but we won't get to them until the end, just like John indicated. And so we are really looking forward to your engagement on this session about engaging in the community. So with that, I will hand things over to Erica.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay. So we're going to be talking today about how to engage people with disabilities in your cause. And I noticed that people online, a lot of you are already in this movement, so you're probably looking for some great ideas to catalyze it. So we're hoping we can give you that today. Now is the time. I mean, I don't know if you all know, but Ford Foundation has actually made it an effort of theirs starting in 2018, where anybody who's applying for grants through them has to put somehow previous projects where they've included people with disabilities, how they've included people with disabilities on their board or volunteer positions. I mean, the time is now to change. So now we're going to be talking about different ideas. If I can figure out how to advance the slides. Okay. Okay. So the information we're going to be sharing today, at least on this segment, a lot has to do with a chapter that myself and Crystal Downey had presented in this book called Diversity and Community Development and Public Administration Theory. A lot of this has to do with community development work. And when you look at what community development is, it's the inclusion of underrepresented groups in governance. And so we have to look at how we can engage these people so that they can be self-determined, they're able to be equal partners in the decision-making process. And then it's also the ways that we look at neighborhoods and those that are marginalized and included in the policy-making process. The thing that we all look at as groups is we look at ways for people to participate, but we don't look at ways how that affects change. So a lot of times it serves in people with disabilities serving token roles where they can say, check a box. I have my person with a disability represented, but it doesn't lead to anything meaningful. So today we're going to be talking about ways that we can try to remove some of those barriers to lead to authentic participation. So the first question is, why do it? Why now? Why are we including people with disabilities? I mean, if you look at the statistics in Arizona, the sheer size of the disability movement is just remarkable. We have 1 in 3 people in the state of Arizona that are personally impacted by disability, either through a direct caregiving role or have a disability themselves. And it's not just an older age issue, even among our youth. 12% of people in our public education system have an individualized education plan where they have to have accommodations in their learning plan. And then that doesn't include the people with physical disabilities who have a 504. So really there's about 15% of our kiddos have some type of disability. So it really is across all ages, across the lifespan. And if we don't figure out how to connect and engage these youth and the adults in the disability community, we're going to lose them. And that actually leads to the fact that a lot of these guys are the most disenfranchised communities in the world. There's 3 billion people with disabilities living in the world. They also are one of the most overrepresented groups when it comes to negative socioeconomic indicators, including poverty, unemployment, disease, morbidity, incarceration numbers. And a lot of that is a product because we don't engage them. And they offer a perspective that's uniquely theirs. They have a resilience perspective and an innovation perspective that we often overlook. I mean, they are the ones that encounter barriers that they can report on and how people have actually helped them, or they overcome themselves, that we can learn how to change our policies so that they're not having to deal with those barriers. And a result of that is that if we can have them as partners, have people with disabilities as partners helping us with these policies, programs, monitoring outcomes, we'll have more responsive services and policies that lead people with disabilities to be included and less marginalized. And so that results in them being more empowered. So it's a cyclical effect where they have increased trust. Like, for example, in the city of Phoenix, if you have a crack in a sidewalk and a person with a disability calls neighborhood services, usually within a day or 2 or 3, you call the number and then they will actually fix that curb cut or that sidewalk so they can actually go through the sidewalk. And that actually makes the citizen feel more empowered because they're able to get the outcome that they were wanting. So it actually leads to more engaged citizens and more trust, and that's what we're looking for to do today. Okay. So what we found in the literature, this is not just a local problem, it's not just an Arizona problem, this is an international problem of how to engage people with disabilities and actually citizens as a whole in a meaningful way. We have a lot of these situations where, as nonprofit organizations, even disability organizations, we have this issue too, where we send out surveys, right? It's not really two-way dialogue, it's just check a box there, tell us how you feel. We have surveys, we have public meetings where people can give their 2 to 3 minutes sharing what they feel about the annual plan, but there's really no deliberative two-way type of conversation where people with disabilities and officials can actually have a real conversation about how to make change. We also have these issues where a lot of us have to put out plans, and we have to put out methods to elicit input for those plans. So we have advisory groups, but usually that relegates people with disabilities to these short-term consulting roles where they're really ineffective, where they feel like they're ineffective and they're just saying, yes, that sounds good, and rubber stamping things. We also rely on interest groups to tell us what people with disabilities think because we don't know how to connect with them individually. So here's a couple slides, and just this ableism does hurt authentic participation, and that ends up relegating them to the sidelines and reinforcing stereotypes that they belong on the sidelines of democracy, and that's not what we want at all. So here's some things that we can do, and in our different organizations, including ours, we're a grant-making organization. So we look at different ways that we can include people with disabilities and ask ourselves, what does that mean for people with disabilities? So planning, how are you including the voices of people with disabilities at the table? How are you making it meaningful so that they can participate? And then are you including them in staff positions? Are you including them in board and volunteer recruitment? Are you asking how your programs and services affect people with disabilities, and are you asking them themselves if this has been able to help improve their lives? And when you're putting out information, is it in accessible format where there's captioning, where there's videos, where there's in plain language? And so we have to add, and then when you do training, is it in such a way that includes your diversity training, includes not only race, ethnicity, but disability? So you have to look at all those areas when it comes to your programming. Here is the link that you guys can go to. This is the most complicated piece that deserves a whole entire webinar in itself. It's on accessibility on websites, because that's the new generation, that's the move forward to engage everybody across the state. Go to webaccess.berkeley.edu, and it has a ton of great tips you can use. And I think there's a web checker on there as well, that you can check your own websites if you like. But that's just a little piece there. An example of how you can engage people, and this is what we ran into at the council, is not only do we put out our grant making to make sure that nonprofits of all types, how are they including people with disabilities in their roles? How are they serving them? How are people with disabilities leading the projects? But we have to look at how you as organizations engage people with disabilities. Do you build strategic partnerships with disability groups so that you know how to even get individuals with disabilities, the feedback from them? I mean, have you started meeting with them? Do you have meeting space that's accessible in a place where they can get to, where there's on the bus line or on the light rail or somewhere where they even trust? Because some of these groups don't trust some of the organizations that are serving them. So is it in a neutral site where they feel like they can trust them? I mean, it could even be at the disability organization, for example, where you can hold a meeting. Do you ask for accommodation? So if it's at a meeting space that has inaccessible restrooms, do you check to make sure that they're accessible or move it? Do you find out if they need a sign language interpreter? Do you find out if they need any kind of other accessibility like dietary issues? If you have food there, like if they're gluten-free or whatever. Next thing is your invitations. Do you use phone calls to reach out to them, personal phone calls? Because sometimes if you just put out a broad blanket invitation saying, people with disabilities welcome, nobody shows because they just feel like they're just lost in the crowd. So sometimes it is that personal invite, knocking on a person's door, emailing them individually. It really is individual to the person on how they best, it could be on a Facebook message, for example. You can even use social media through a disability organization to put out ads or whatever, or blast to get them to come, to give feedback or to recruit for a board position. There's all different ways you can do that. Again, I mentioned accommodations because that's so important to always ask for accommodations before a meeting. Also, whenever you have your board meetings, there's always these Robert's rules, and it's very, very predetermined, like this is how the agenda goes. There's not much room for dialogue, a very tight agenda. So allowing more time on the agenda with the person with a disability. And I'm talking specifically on people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I know we at the council, we actually take time with individual members beforehand to go through the agenda, walk them through it, so and ask questions, whatever questions that they have, so that when they come in, they're prepared. We also allow telecommuting because we know that transportation is an issue. And we also allow, if people do need more time on the agenda, we allow more time for people to discuss different agenda items that may be more complicated. Also, make sure that whenever you put out any information that it's written at a 5th grade level, and that's just part of universal design, not only just people with intellectual disabilities, but across the board on a 5th grade level, because you'd be surprised about what people may not understand. The last thing is make sure your seating arrangements distribute power. So put your chair next to the person with a disability so that it's not just all the people in power on one side of the table and the people without power on the other side. Make sure that that's more being distributed. And also make sure that you recognize your members, people with disabilities that come out, recognize them, if they're doing things right, validate them, offer mentoring by the leaders in the group. And that way they keep coming back. And I guess a prime thing to mention to you guys is it's so important to establish relationships with the disability community that most of you don't know how to do it. This slide here gives you all the different ways so that you can reach out to your local independent living centers, This website here is for the Arizona Community Leadership Academy, which trains people with disabilities on how to be leaders, to serve on boards, commissions, or to be volunteers in different organizations. So reach out to them. You can also reach out to us. And remember to recruit disability leaders in your organizations. They are part of the diversity initiatives, race, ethnicity, gender, disability. So please remember that as a group that can benefit your organization. And Garrick McFadden is going to be talking about ways to accommodate people with disabilities. He happens to be my husband too, but he actually has concrete strategies that might help you when it comes to when you look at ways for people with disabilities to volunteer. I'm going to come slide over.
Hello, my name's Garrick McFadden, and I'm lucky enough to be married to Erica, Dr. McFadden. I just got done with a intense startup, and with that organization, I found that I employed and was giving people their first job, and a lot of them had significant developmental disabilities. One of the things, what we have a picture of this slide is, for one gentleman in particular, I recognize that this person was extremely loyal. This person worked very, very hard and wanted to be put in the best position for him to win. And I knew that if he was placed in the best position for him to win, he could make my company, he could make my organization better, more robust. So the first thing that we did is I created a script from him, and I made him practice with me over and over and over. And we wrote everything out, and we included things that he could find himself in that was not in anybody else's script, because there were issues that were important to him. With that said, what I recognized is if I could put him in a position for him to have a script that when he got on the phone and made phone calls with people, he would be able to win, that he would be able to convert people into believers. And that's what one of the first practices we learned. We also did this with people who had, that particular organization employed people who had autism, who had PTSD, who had schizophrenia, some people with physical disabilities. And what we did for each person, was figure out something that happened. One person had gout, and not gout, but had Crohn's disease. And he had a horrible flare-up of Crohn's disease that left him in the hospital and then at home recovering. Instead of taking away his employment, what we did was we figured out a project that needed to be done, tailored it for him, gave him specific objectives, and let him go home with a laptop, sent a laptop to him, and we'd come to his house where he is recovering and give him everything that he needed to complete the project successfully. And he did. And he didn't suffer any loss of income. A person who had schizophrenia, we realized that this person needed somebody with them in the field at all times. But the person was competitive, wanted to do an excellent job, was kind, and actually made our organization better. So what we did is we sent somebody with them to shadow the person to make sure that they were never alone, that they never got too stressed, and never were uncomfortable. What we figured out is, again, taking the little simple steps for some people it might be a script, for some people it might be creating a project that needs to be done and allowing them to perform the project on their own. Or in this instance, with the woman with schizophrenia, is allowing the person to be shadowed and followed. One other thing that we had an instance with a gentleman who had PTSD. He, by the nature of the work, the police were called on him. And the young man had done nothing wrong, didn't violate any laws, and was incorrectly told that they were soliciting when in fact they were not soliciting. And based on that, we had a conversation with Scottsdale Police Department, Phoenix Police Department, and let them know that there's going to be other people who are doing this type of work out into the field, and that their police officers gave them what they needed to know to look for. And so the police now knew that if they had these 2 or 3 things, that they were not violating the law and that they should be released to go on their own. Also knowing that some of the people who are out in the field might have developmental disabilities or, in this case, PTSD, that would make it harder for them to, there need to be more de-escalation. And Scottsdale Police showed that a number of their police officers had been trained in these type of techniques. And Phoenix, not so much, but it was something for Phoenix Police Department to work on. So when we know what barriers that might exist outside of the field, that might exist outside of the office, but in the field, we can create plans that help us overcome them. So I'm getting ready to end with my time, but what I've learned is if you can give people with disabilities, if you can hire them, you can train them, if you can give them everything, pay them the same amount. That's one thing we did right. We paid everybody, able-bodied and disabled, the same amount of money for doing the same work. Then you can succeed. So I'm going to turn this over for more excellent news over to Chatham. And thank you very much for your time.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you today? No, I'm sure I can't hear you say hi back, but I know you're saying hi back. I work for the Maricopa County Recorder's Office. I do community outreach. In fact, I know a bunch of you on the list. Hi, Becca. Hi, George. Hi, everyone. And what I want to talk to you about today is our efforts with Gompers. So we had a disability roundtable, and in the follow-up, I sent a letter to everyone participating saying I wanted to do a tour of your shop. Someone on the board of Gompers invited me to go over there. I met with Mark Botterbush, and he showed me around, and I had the most interesting conversation with him. I asked if anyone had ever asked if his employees wanted to register to vote, and I literally had to pick his jaw off the ground. And once he regained his composure, we set up a meeting for about 3 weeks later. I told him what the citizens would need in order to register. And then I came down with a couple other staff members, and we registered 33 people to vote. This was back in September of 2017. About 4 weeks later, there was an election going on, so we brought a special election board down so that everyone we had signed up to vote was able to vote. And those who were able to brought their ballots in, and then we had our special election board work with these folks one-on-one to actually cast a ballot. It was really exciting, and I spoke to Mark about how we could spread the word and register other folks to vote, and that led to Mark championing this cause. And what we have, all the people that registered to vote at Gompers and who had subsequently cast a ballot were really excited about doing some peer-to-peer advocacy, and they became Gompers voting ambassadors. When I told this to Recorder Fontes, he was incredibly excited about this peer-to-peer conversation that was going to take place. And I took Recorder Fontes down to Gompers, and we met with Mark and Vanessa and Linda and about a dozen or so of these folks. And every time we've done a voter registration drive at another organization working with folks with autism, Mark has come out and he's brought the voting ambassadors. And at this point, we've done 3 or 4 other organizations that we've actually gone out and done voter registration drives with. The Gompers ambassadors came to the statewide Developmental Disabilities organization, and they gave a presentation there, which was very exciting. And we're just, spreading the word and getting the word out that citizens have the right to participate in their government. And unless you've been convicted of a felony or the courts have taken away your rights, then you have the right to register to vote and actually cast a ballot. Now, one of the other things we want to do is voting can be difficult, so we're also doing some practice voting. We'll bring our election equipment out to organizations. We have a famous name ballot people can use, or we can vote on an issue that's relevant to the organization. So if an organization is trying to decide between Project A and Project B on how to spend some money and want the participants in that program to vote on it, we can do that. It's a nice hands-on experience for voting. And then this outreach goes far beyond just the developmental disability communities. I spend a lot of time at Ability 360 and other organizations so that people can get a chance to use the equipment, to register to vote, and just to know that their vote really does matter. Democracy is not a spectator sport. It only works when we all participate, and everyone's voice is critically important to voting and having their will expressed to their elected officials. So, you know, whatever we can do is at the county recorder's office to assist that, we're ready, willing, and able to do it, whether it's developmental disabilities or the hard of hearing or blind or physical disabilities. You know, every citizen has the right to vote, and we just want to make sure that everyone hears that and has an opportunity to express themselves, especially in communities that have been marginalized in the past. We want to make sure that we hear the needs of the communities. We want to make sure that all of the edge voting machines are set up at every polling location. Nothing breaks my heart more than to hear a voter go to a polling location and the machine wasn't set up. Recorder Fontes is adamant about that as well. So we're doing a lot of things to make sure that we listen to the community, and that when we say something to the community, they know they can bank on it. So, you know, I've given my personal promise that the edge machines will be set up. And when we go through looking at new accessible voting machines, obviously we will invite all members of the community to come out and test out the equipment, give us the feedback on it, what they like, what they don't like. We really consider this to be a partnership with the community, not just this is how we do things, but hey, how do you know, what do you need in your community to vote efficiently or vote effectively? And the biggest part of this is just listening to the needs and concerns and then shooting them up the chain of command and finding solutions. We won't always have solutions, but sometimes we have some real creative and smart people in the community who really help us out. I got to throw a shout out to Mark at Gompers. He has been fantastic. I wish I could take credit for it, but literally he's been leading the charge on this outreach effort, and it's really amazing to see it all come together and the fruit that it's starting to bear. And this goes for all organizations. So I am happy to do voter registration drives at any location. And we do have another election coming up on November 6th, and the deadline to vote, the deadline to register to vote is 29 days prior to the election, so that's early October. And then obviously the polling locations will be open. We'll start 27 days out with the early voting sites, and then 10 days out, and then precincts on election day. And make sure you sign up for the permanent early voting list. You get to vote at home. We also offer those ballots in Braille, which is pretty exciting, and a large print, which is the size of a poster. It's 2 feet by 3 feet with a very large font. But for our citizens who want to vote independently and have limited sight, it's a godsend. And we have a lot of tools in our toolbox to assist our residents, our citizens to vote, including the special election board. So if you have any questions, you can give me actually email me is the easiest. It's ckitz@risc.maricopa.gov. And I am more than happy to answer your questions, do voter registration drives, or whatever you need. And at this point, it looks like I am going to turn it over to Richard Cruz. We're going to do a little hot seat swapping. So I'm going to leave the mic and camera on, and he will pop into the chair and take over from here. And I look forward to answering your questions at the end. And here's Richard.
Thank you so much. So I am Richard Cruz. Let me center myself and drop myself a little bit lower here so everybody can see me. And there we go. Okay. So I'm Richard Cruz from the Radical Solutions Group. It's RADICLE. Ultimately, what we work with is organizations and systems to be able to move folks at the speed of conversation and have really effective conversations to be able to move folks in their communities. Really quick, what you're looking at here is my son, Jeremiah. He's the oldest of my 3 boys. Jeremiah is a superhero by my definition. He is diagnosed with high-functioning autism. And he's a big part of why I do the work that I do. Just let's go through this really quickly. What we really want to focus on, though, is healthy communities and what does it mean to organize communities. So one of the quotes that I feel really passionately about and that drives my work is Dr. Martin Luther King said, "Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream." And so one of the questions that you always have to ask yourself as you're doing this work is, how do your current practices both heal the communities that you serve, and how do the current practices hurt the communities that you serve? Because as we're working for justice, as we're working for advocacy, as we're working to work alongside communities, what we have to be able to acknowledge is that there's one of 2 things that you're doing. Either you're damming justice, right, in terms of blocking the flow of what justice looks like, or you are creating space for justice to flow through. It's one or the other, right? We don't really operate in the gray when we're looking at our particular practices. And so if you're not able to really sit down and really examine your practices, you could actually be more part of the problem with your solutions than you are the solution. And so we definitely want to be able to have you examine that. So this question comes up is, what makes a healthy community, right? What are the things that actually make a healthy community? So many of you have seen this wellness wheel, the elements of a healthy community from Vitalist Health Foundation as adapted by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And so these are some of the things that come up, whether it's access to care, affordable quality housing, community safety, economic opportunity, educational opportunity, environmental quality and affordable food, community design, parks and recreation, social and cultural cohesion, social justice, and transportation options. All of these create the wheel for what are the components of a healthy community, right? And then how does both resiliency and health equity fold into all of those things, right? These are all really important factors and things that you have to consider as far as how do these things play out in the communities that I serve, right? Both how are these things present in my own community, so how do I use them or how do I take them for granted, but also how are these things present or not present, and then how are communities actually able to access these things or completely not, right? And so these are some of the spaces that, as we're considering what a healthy community is, we have to really understand, like, are these things present? Because one of the things that we miss quite often, these things become missed, is because I define privilege as freedom from consideration. And so these are things that may be present in the communities that you're currently, where you live, that may be absent of where you serve, and you'll miss it because you've never had to think about, oh, I've never thought about how my community is designed, right? We see this in the conversation around light rail with the 4 lanes or 2 lanes, right? Conversation. We just take for granted in many cases because everywhere else that there's light rail, it's 4 lanes. That's a whole separate conversation, but it is one that currently communities are organizing about in South Phoenix around the light rail. So what I want you to think about is, what is a really community-centered organization? And so it's an organization whose purpose and function is to coordinate, cooperative efforts carried out by local residents, the key word there is local, to promote the interests of their community. Now, we can say local within a geographic context, but in this particular context, I want you to think of local as in those that are directly impacted by the issues where you're working, right? And so local may be not geographic, local may be tied to ability, local may be tied to marginalization, local may be tied to so many different things, but it should be something that hits home specifically for those that are working within that community, right? So far too many times what happens is that when we're talking about these things, we haven't had a paradigm shift, right? We need to have a paradigm shift around what does this actually look like. So when we're talking about shifting the culture to being more community-centered, right, it means doing less of empowering populations. I don't like the word empowerment, right? It means more about like how do we energize people and communities. When we're energizing people and communities, then that looks more like understanding that there's more of an opportunity for self-advocacy, right? And so I think about this as a father, right? Let's put this in a way that many people can understand it. As a father, when my son comes home with homework, right? I could do the homework for him, but does he actually grow if I'm doing the homework for him? As opposed to he may say, Daddy, I don't want you to help me do the homework. I just, I need you to tell me what this word means. But he's like, I'm going to do it myself, right? And then he builds the capacity to continue to do that moving forward because he's been energized in the work, right? And so when we empower, many times we believe that it's us that have helped them do the work, as opposed to energizing folks to acknowledge, you know what, honestly, all I'm going to do is turn on the light in the room and then they're going to tell me what's in the room, right? So we ask community, what do they need, as opposed to determining what is best for communities. Many times, folks with their degrees, with their lived experience, with their perceived expertise, believe and come into communities many times saying things like, this is what's best for the community, failing to recognize these communities have survived and been resilient for generations and decades based on their own set of cultural competencies and cultural norms and their own inter-community policy. And so, like, really asking community, like, what do you need, right? Often, we go back to the old adage of, like, if you feed a man fish, like, you feed him for a day. If you teach a man to fish, like, you can feed him for the rest of his life because he can fish for himself. But the real question isn't like whether or not you teach him to fish or you feed him fish. It's asking, do you like fish? Right? Is fishing even is that something that fits with your cultural diet? Right? Like it's these conversations that are really a paradigm shift, as opposed to like us assuming that fish is what's best, because maybe there's something in that community's digestive practices that fish actually messes them up, right? But if we're focused on like fish is the best answer because everybody told me that I've got to teach this whole community to fish, right? We miss the whole opportunity. Okay, I know it's metaphorical and it's kind of heavy, but it's things to really think about. We have to be able to reflect on how your practices can be problematic, right? You have to be willing to acknowledge that you may be the problem, right? You have to be able to do that. Organizations that don't take the time to acknowledge where they are the problem then become the problem, right? You can't assume that your solutions can't be a part of the problem because we're all problematic in some way, shape, or form. It's just the nature of like our society. So we have to be able to identify these are the things that I'm doing that are helping, but these are the things that I'm doing that are hurting, right? And through that, right, then we're able to truly dive in at a deeper level, because then we can really become impactful in our work and how we organize a community, because now we've acknowledged, oh, this is what we're doing that has further perpetuated the problem over time, right? And we can begin to remove those particular elements. If we're not able to identify how we're problematic, that's ultimately like an institutional and organizational ego issue. And ego and community don't vibe. At some point, ego and community are going to crash, right? Also, you have to be able to hire people, and Garrick talked about this earlier, hiring people that are directly tied to impacted populations, right? I'm a consultant, right? So some consultants might be mad at me to say this, but hiring consultants with knowledge, but not experience within that community, ultimately you are perpetuating the problem, right? Because what we should really understand is that folks with that lived experience, and Annie Casey Foundation has started doing some of this work where they are, because like they acknowledge that the folks with the best experience are actually those on the ground with community organizing. So they've been hiring community organizers in Baltimore to help them make an impact in Baltimore around community impact, and then paying them the same they would those high-priced consultants. So you're not paying them less because they've never made that much before. No, if you're going to pay a consultant $125 an hour to come in and facilitate for you and lend capacity and learning for your organization to be able to fully impact a specific area, then you pay folks on the ground that are in community $125 an hour. You don't pay them less just because you know that they've never made that much before, right? You determine that this is how much this information is worth to us. This is what we would be paying for it. And so to be equitable in the space, then we pay these folks the same as anybody else. So what you have to do from what we ultimately get to, right? What's most important is being able to ask ourselves these questions, right? How do we reimagine completely new possibilities, right? How do we build healthy communities working with and alongside communities, not for communities, right? Because that's a really powerful thing to be able to do, to shift from we're doing for folks to how do we work with folks and use the opportunity to work with folks to build capacity, right? And identifying like where their capacity is so that you're lending your engine to a particular space and then figuring out like, okay, this is where I'm actually helpful, right? This is where the need is, right? Because there may be things that a particular community cannot do, right? And that's where you're lending the capacity because they've asked you for it, right? If you haven't been asked for it, then you're imposing, right? And I think you've all at some point had a house guest that imposed and stayed too long, right? And you don't want to be the house guest, the bad house guest as an organization, right? And so really being able to, when you see this slide here, a lot of you have seen the equality equity slide, right? But liberation is something totally different. Liberation is the space of how do we identify where the fences are? So we're not just helping people navigate the fence, but we're working to remove the fence from the communities that we want to serve, right? That's where real power, real change, and real things begin to move forward so that they can be just. So your homework looks three ways. One, look in the mirror of your organization. Figure out who's present, right? And where are they present? Do we have community, that local community? Are they present at every level of decision making? Are they present, or are they just on the front lines, right? Are they on the board? I know this was spoken about earlier. Are they on your boards? Are they making decisions? Are they on programmatic staff? Are they in director level positions to be able to make those decisions so that that voice is really in the space? Then assess, how are you hurting or healing, or hurting and healing the communities that you serve? And ask, whose mission is it really, right? Really closing with this. Whose mission is it really? Is it your organization's mission, or is it the community that you serve's mission, right? Because if the community that you serve isn't a part of the mission that you've created for your organization, then you're just doing good work that makes you feel good, as opposed to the work that the community that you want to serve is actually identified as the need, right? And I believe that we all put entirely too much work, too much stress, and too much strain on our lives to this work to just be imposing in the space, as opposed to being effective, healthy, real partners that walk alongside the people that we want to serve to be able to shift systems in a very real way. So that's my part. And so with any questions, if you want to be able to contact me, this is my contact information. It's my website. Remember, it's Radical, RADICLE, solutionsgroup.com. The Radical is the first part of the root to emerge from the seed, because if we're going to truly impact these issues, we have to do it from the root cause, not just from the leads. There's my email information and my phone number. Please feel free to contact me with any questions that you have. But right now, I know we're going to throw it and have some more conversation. Thank you. You wanna come in?
If you'd like to ask some questions of the presenters, you can place that in the chat box or to the far left in the Q&A pod, and we'll monitor both of those. And then I'll extend the questions out to the presenters, and you'll get real-time answers. And Erica, it was requested to make the webinar cam large, so if you want to activate yours again, you can come up on the screen.
Yeah, I don't see them start sharing. Okay.
There you go.
Great.
Looks like we have some people typing in the chat area.
Okay.
First question, Erica, from Becca earlier. She was wondering if it was possible to send out the PDF download of the diversity and communication theory chapter in the book that you were referencing earlier.
Yes, I can find out. It's the book chapter is called Overcoming the Tokenization of People with Disabilities in Community Development. And I've got to find out, because it's part of, they just released the textbook, so I don't know, or copyright, if they'll let us do that or not. So let me, I mean, I don't make any money off of it at all, but I don't want to get sued either. So let me check, Becca, and I'll email you back and let you know how we can do that. I mean, I have a draft. I just want to make sure that I can send that out.
Thank you. First question from Natalie Luna Rose, and seems like it's a general question for everyone. What do you think is the biggest hurdle in getting buy-in from groups/organizations?
Okay, so I'll take that first. So part of the biggest hurdle, I think, in getting groups buy-in is that what we really find is, if we're like moving beyond cynicism, is that we understand that like groups a lot of times haven't been asked, right? Those that are in like our most impacted and most marginalized communities, they're just largely not asked, right? And so if I haven't asked you, then like both the organization who now is asking may not have the capacity or the muscle built. Like maybe they have the capacity to ask, but they haven't built the muscles to actually have the patience to work alongside those communities. So it's a whole nother, it becomes a hurdle in and of itself, because the way that you work with those communities are going to be different than the communities that you've traditionally always worked with. And so then you have to be willing to move at a different speed as you work alongside those organizations. So it becomes a task both for the organization that's doing the outreach to understand like this is going to be a different level of interaction than what it traditionally looks like, as well as for the community to understand like, oh, there's an organization that truly wants to work with us, right? And so there's bend on both sides that has to take place.
And I agree with Richard. I think also what's important to know is that a lot of these groups think that they are working with people with disabilities. But again, it's not like the authentic type of participation that we're talking about. It's more like check the box. They sit on my advisory committee, but they don't hardly say anything. You know, they don't understand the material, or you know, or I had a town hall or I had a public forum and like 2 people came. So people already think, or they're having, you know, organizations speak for that person, and so they think that they're already getting their needs at the table. And as we also seen from Richard's presentation, that's not a really great way to do, you know, with people with disabilities instead of for them. So I just think it's getting people to understand what authentic engagement means, and it's not just checking that box.
If I can chime in for 2 seconds too, I noticed that when I started this job a year and a half ago, people expect the tokenism. So when you are authentic and you come back over and over and you show up to the meetings and you participate and you listen, then people start to take you seriously. There's nothing that scares people more than hearing the saying, "Hi, I'm from the government and I'm here to help." That really does scare a lot of people in the community. But if you sit down and listen and just say, "Hey, we know there are issues. Let's discuss them. How can we make it better?" and just encourage the ongoing conversation rather than just, as Erica so frequently says, check the boxes. That's what I really love about how organic the Gompers scenario came about. I didn't go there with a checklist. I went there to learn and said, "Hey, why don't we register people to vote?" And then Mark really took it over. The participants at Gompers were really excited. I literally just had to show up and be responsive to their needs, and I didn't have to create anything. I just had to listen and participate. And that's the real difference. It's just listening and participating. And wearing cool American flag polos.
Yes.
It's just one of the layers to it is also understanding the historical context, right? Because with many communities, there have been things that have been done to them by organizations, by institutions, and like history's not that far removed. And so like we may not understand in our present day context as why particular communities don't engage. But then like when you look at historically what's been done to that community, it begins to make a lot of sense why there may be a lack of trust when the government shows up. Because they're like, you know, we know that, you know, when government shows up, this is what's happened in the past. And so we also have to be mindful of that.
Thank you all. That's okay. I'll go on to the next question. Margarita asks, so does your company monitor other companies' policies as to how they impact the community and those with disabilities? This is for Richard Cruz.
So what we do is we work alongside organizations to be able to identify what their own practices look like, right? And to be able to break those things down. So that's the type of work that we do. So we would go in, do an assessment, and really help organizations and those working within the organization as well as their partners to really identify what are the things that they are doing that are both helping and hurting. And then how do we then identify what is your willingness once you identify what your problems are? What is your willingness to actually tackle those issues? Because you may identify something as a problem but not actually be willing to do anything besides pay lip service to it. And if you're not willing to go beyond lip service, and that's not something that we would begin to identify what new solutions could look like, but the issues that you're really willing to swim in, per se, right? When you're really willing to swim into the swampy waters of what these practices might look like, then we can really get some work done.
Awesome, thank you. Margarita has one more question. What is the type of jobs Erica's husband has for people with disabilities and the age range?
I am a failed congressional candidate for office, and what I had people doing is data entry, phone canvassing, door-to-door canvassing, and also being my body person. The age range of people, there was no age range, but basically anybody that was 18 to whatever age could work for us. But the ages that we had employed were, I would say 22, 21 was the youngest, and the oldest with a developmental disability was 41 years old. Oops, audio.
Eric, there was a moment right after you were talking about canvassing and door-to-door stuff that the webinar went silent a little bit, so there might have been a couple of other job titles that you were listing there.
I think it was Garrick talking. I mean, he said they had, and do you want to repeat what you said, the jobs? Data entry?
Oh, yeah, if you didn't hear it, it was data entry, door-to-door canvassing, phone canvassing, being a body person for me, like following me around to different events. Not so much. And the ages were, the youngest person with a developmental disability was about 21 years old, and the oldest was 41. But we would have hired anybody from 18 to whatever age to do the work.
Awesome. Thank you. And Marguerite is asking, would it be possible to have his email address? And maybe that could be done post the webinar. We can get you Margarita's email.
Yeah, my email address is Garrick, which is GARRICK at elect ELECT Garrick, my first name GARRICK.com. Perfect.
All right, well, this is Sarah again. I'm going to hop on if people want to think about if they have any more questions or not. I just wanted to say from the council's perspective, we are really encouraging organizations to sign up for our grants list. Why is that important? Well, you heard a lot of great tips on how to make your organization more accessible, more open, more engaging with the disability community. And so whether or not you're a disability-related organization or if you are simply one out in the community, we want to encourage you to sign up for our grants list. And you can do that by simply typing in your email address. That's important because we release funding opportunities. Funding opportunities specifically to get people with disabilities involved in their neighborhoods and in their cities. And so if you're feeling inspired after hearing all of this great content, please type your email address in the chat box. We'll get you signed up. And if there are other organizations that you know of, particularly non-disability organizations that you think would be excited about this opportunity, let us know. And when we share the recording of this webinar, feel free to forward the video to them because we want to make sure as many organizations as possible are learning new ways to be open and to include more people in their movements and causes. Thanks, everyone. John, did you have anything else to add? Or do we have any more questions?
It looks like Margarita has one more question. What about involving libraries? We do have the emails populating the list. That was the last question up there. What about involving libraries?
Well, we use them as voting centers, and we also do voter registration drives at libraries, so we're in. It's also a good place to get a book.
We actually did a webinar actually targeted to libraries last year on dealing with people that have behavioral health that are in crisis, because we found that they were, a lot of times they acted as the first responder before the police were called. But we couldn't get a lot of engagement by libraries for some odd reason. So if you know the trick to get libraries involved,
There's a little
let us know.
qualification. Margarita says so people could work there. But she also says, okay, I will check. I just want to say you'll be
That is a good idea.
receiving an email tomorrow morning. But in that email, there is a link to an evaluation. And I'll post that link in the chat area now. If you want to go directly from here to filling out that evaluation, we would much appreciate it. We value your feedback. If there are any other questions, please place them in the chat area. We still are, are we over at this point, 2:30? Okay. Well, I guess I'll say thank you and then hand it off to the rest of the crew.
Thank you again for everyone for joining us, speakers and participants. Erica, Garrick, Chatham, Richard, if there's anything else that you'd like to share as we close out, I will open that up for you. Other than that, thank you everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and keep a lookout for the recorded version of this webinar in your inbox if you are on our mailing list or if you already signed up for the webinar.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tell all your friends.